Hey everyone, I am so excited to be sharing doing this Facebook Live event with you guys. Today we're just going to talk about my experience in getting into dental school. So right now I currently work for King & McEwen Orthodontics as a dental assistant, and I work for a dental lab company, visiting different dentistries and promoting our lab to them. So I graduated in May of 2017 from the University of Georgia. And I originally went into UGA as a pre-med emphasis, and that was because I thought I wanted to go into medical school out of high school. That's kind of where I was thinking, but it never really felt right. So after my freshman year at UGA, I actually had a huge dental emergency. It's what I call it because I'm traumatic. But I had to have a tooth extracted, and I was terrified because I was in braces for so long. And because of that, I decided to look up everything about the process, and had an amazing dentist who was just so calming and inspiring. And I looked into the field, realized that it was something that fascinated me. I thought it was so cool that we were able to extract a tooth, and that my wisdom tooth would go into the spot and I wouldn't need an implant, and my smile wouldn't shift, and all of that. So after that, everything pretty much fell into place. Dentistry really combined all of my passions, from wanting to serve others, being a creative person, being very interested in the science and healthcare field. So at UGA, I was involved. I did research, which isn't necessarily a mandatory thing, or like something that people do just because it looks good. I did research in what I was interested in, and that's what I would suggest you to do, because it does take a lot of time to actually be involved in a research project. You do have to give a lot of your time. So I did something with the systems project, which was an educational research and learning how to teach kids better about science. And I'm actually interested in the academia side of dentistry as well. I also did research with the Hopkinson lab, which was pretty much just trying to understand how corals acquire carbon for photosynthesis. So I decided to do that because I'm very big on global warming and the ocean. But the point of it is, if you're going to do research, you should do something that you're interested in. And especially for dental school, be able to talk about the research that you're doing if you're going to write about it on your application. You want to make sure you can show that you understood what was going on and that you weren't doing it just to put it on your resume. With extracurriculars, it's definitely important to not be involved in a ton, but to be very involved in what you're involved in. You want to be able to show your leadership. So while I was a part of different organizations and like doing their like yearly events and stuff, the two organizations that I really highlighted were UGA Red Cross and the Pre-Dental Society. So I was the vice president of UGA Red Cross my senior year, after having some other exec positions, and my senior year for Pre-Dental Society, I was the community service and outreach chair. So those are what I really focused on, and I knew that I was investing my time in organizations that would be beneficial to me applying to dental school. And granted, I did love both of those organizations. So I did a lot of community outreach because that's something that was important to me even from before high school, through different organizations besides Pre-Dental Society and UGA Red Cross. And I was also a Clark County mentor, mentoring students in the Athens area once a week. It's just very underprivileged. And that is something that has come up a lot in my dental school interviews too. If you can work in any areas that are underprivileged or get to know different socioeconomic situations, that helps, because a lot of dental schools serve the underserved. So having experience in that and being able to talk about that is great. For dental shadowing, you want to mostly shadow in the general dental area. Some schools have shadowing hour requirements, so make sure that you know what the requirements are of the schools that you're applying to. You don't want it to come to where you're getting ready to apply and you realize that you're 100 hours short of the requirement, and then you can't apply to that school just for that reason. While it is important to get most of your hours or a significant amount of your hours from general dentists, I definitely recommend shadowing specialties and other fields that interest you. It's nice getting to, for yourself, it's nice getting to see them, and especially if it's a career path that you're thinking you want to specialize, shadowing is so important. But also showing that, like, yeah, you're very interested and would love being a general dentist, but also you love exploring all the specialties that dentistry has to offer. Keep a journal or a log of your shadowing experiences. You want to remember who you shadowed, how long you shadowed them for, and I always wrote down something that I learned or something that was special about that day shadowing. And you also want to maintain a good relationship with the doctors you're shadowing and kind of start to feel out which ones you might be asking for a letter of recommendation, and let them know early in advance so they can start paying attention to you as well, so they actually can write a good personalized letter of recommendation. A lot of people ask about employment while they're at school and how that looks on applications. So you don't have to have a job to show that you're balanced at managing school and work. You can show that you're balanced. You can manage time with extracurriculars and volunteering and good grades. So if you have a job, though, make sure it doesn't affect your grades. You never want to show that you're working full-time, that's great, but also have terrible grades. If you're in a situation where you have a job because you have to have a job to pay for school or to help pay for housing or something, and it does affect your grades, there are definitely parts of the application where you can explain that, and it helps a ton. So I worked for Kaplan Test Prep, and it was great because I was able to tie that back to dental school, and it helped me enormously. Before applying, visiting schools and networking schools is also very important. You want that when you send your application in, that the schools are able to put a face to your name, and especially the schools that you're really interested in. It's so important to get in touch with faculty and their admissions committees and let them know, visit the school. A lot of schools have pre-dental days, and just really get out there and start visiting them. The DAT, the best advice I could give is starting early with your prep. Ideally, you want to have your scores by the time the application opens. I know that doesn't happen for everyone, and a lot of people are still taking the DAT when the application opens, like me. But if you could, that's just ideal. You want to make sure that you set a study plan and really stick to it. And don't try to use too many resources. A lot of people try to use all the prep resources there are out there and get overwhelmed and don't actually get anything done because they're not using one the way that it's supposed to be used. So I decided that I was going to apply to dental school after my senior year because, like I said, I was involved in a lot of extra leadership positions in my extracurricular organizations. I was still doing a lot of shadowing senior year, so there was a lot that I wanted to show on my application that wouldn't have been there if I applied the traditional way right after junior year. So I took my DAT at the end of June. So throughout June, while I was studying for the DAT, I was also working on my application because it opened up in June. But I took my DAT and was able to send in my scores in July, and my application was completely complete. But it was complete by the time I had taken my DAT, so really all they were waiting on were my DAT scores. Another thing that I did is I really understood the application before it opened up on June 1st, and for those applying from here on out, basically, you guys have it off better because the application will open up in May. You still won't be able to submit it until June, but you can start filling it out and at least start to get all of your stuff together, and that helps a ton. You never want to be looking at the application for the first time when it opens or when it's due. You want to make sure that throughout your undergrad career, you're starting to put together your application. So what I did is I had a notebook with each section of the application, and I was just writing down things that I would highlight in each section, from extracurriculars to grades to whatever it was. And you want to start working on your personal statement early, and so that you can have a lot of people read it over. It takes a lot of stress away to have that done. And you don't want to be doing it while you're trying to study for your DAT. You also, another tip of advice that I have is every time you start a class while you're in college, try to get to know the professor and decide, is this a class and a professor that I would want to write a recommendation for me. So a lot of the requirements are like 2 science professors and a dentist, and like a personal, like an employer, someone writing you an interview. So those science classes, you want to make sure that they're classes you do well in, and that the professor actually knows you and knew about your goals and plans of going to dental school, so that they can actually write you a recommendation. A lot of times professors will actually say that they can't write you a recommendation because they don't know much about you, just your grades, even if they're good. So like I said, for the application, my best advice is keeping an application folder from early on. Also, in that folder or that notebook, really research the schools that you're applying to, and maybe make a tab or something for each of them just to know all of the requirements. It's the same thing like the shadowing hours that I was just saying. You never want to get to the point where you're ready to submit your application, and it turns out you can't apply to a school that you wanted to because you don't have a certain class that they need or some other requirement. So just make sure that you know those ahead of time. Really, I wouldn't say like you want to brag about yourself, but in your notebook or your folder, you want to have a list of things that you want to brag about on your application. With dentistry or with dental school, a good piece of advice that I got, or even just for grad school in general, from one of our deans at UGA when he was looking over my application, he was saying that you want to show that you're an overlap of a lot of things, making you the perfect candidate for dental school. You want your application to show that you're perfect for their school. So you want to show that you have the overlap of the grades and the passion and the involvement and the leadership and the experience in the dental field. So figuring out how best you're going to incorporate all that into your application, really knowing that beforehand and working on it with your personal statement too, really helps. So after the application and all that fun stuff comes interview season. So interviews can start coming pretty much from the time you submit your application, so around late summer, and they continue all the way up into spring. So if you do get invited to an interview, it's so exciting. Especially since I worked, I made sure that as soon as I got an interview invite, I replied to them really, really fast because the dates do fill up. You want to make sure that you know your application inside and out before going into your interview. So I always downloaded a copy of my AdSAS application for that school and read over the questions that were specific to that school, and making sure that I really knew what I talked about for my extracurricular activities, for my research. I also did a dental outreach trip to Nicaragua, like remembering like some procedures that I observed there and key points from that, because you never know what they will pull from your application and ask about. So for example, there's a manual dexterity section on the application that I'm sure y'all know about, and I had to take a lot of entomology classes at UGA because I was a biology and a biotechnology major. And so I had to collect bugs and display them. And one of the things that I put down on manual dexterity was having to display these insects. And I thought it was like such a minor detail, like no one would even care about. And of course, the school that I'm going to attend to in my interview, it came up and a girl was just asking me like more about the classes and like insects and what I took from it and if I actually like bugs now and stuff. So they really do pay attention to every little detail of your application. So you want to dress comfortably at your interviews. I know a lot of people think that for a dental school interview, it has to be a suit, guys a suit, girls a suit. And when you go into the interview, you'll see most people in suits, but you'll also see people dressing in just dress clothes and professional clothes. And I would say just wear what you're comfortable in. I didn't wear a suit because that's just not what I was comfortable in. And obviously it won't affect your chances of getting into school. You're not going to get denied because you're not wearing a suit. And you don't want to, interviews typically last all day and you don't want to be uncomfortable. And your interviews could continue throughout spring. So if you haven't had an interview, I got my last interview invite for a date at the end of January. So even if you don't get interview invites before December 1st, that's totally fine. Don't stress out. They're going to keep coming. People interview well into spring, well into March. It's normal. And then speaking of that, December 1st is the first day you can find out about acceptances if you interviewed before then. It's definitely a nerve-wracking day, but something that an admissions counselor told me at my interview, or like told my group, that was really nice, was no one at dental school when you get there is going to know if you got accepted on December 1st or December 30th or March 1st or even off the wait list in June. So it doesn't really matter if you find out on December 1st. It is really nice and exciting to find out on December 1st and having that good news to share, but also don't stress out if you don't hear from any schools. Then they'll surely get back to you. Especially if you interviewed, so it's not too late. I would say if there's schools that you're really, really interested in, after you send in your application, just reach out to them, say that you wanted to, if you met them before, just reintroduce yourself or remind them that you visited their school and you love them. If you haven't visited, just reach out to introduce yourself. Just say that you sent in your application and you just wanted to reach out. I also did email all of my interviewers right after my interviews at each school. And you don't want, when you're emailing them thank you or sending a thank you note, you don't want to be very generic. So what I did is I just remembered, or in my emails, like spoke about a specific part of our conversation. Like for example, at one of my interviews, my interviewer was like stressing out during the interview or like right before my interview because her phone kept acting up and she couldn't find the charger and just always shut off, and it was like the 50th time it happened. So in my email, one of the things that I mentioned at the end was that like I really hope her phone started to work. But you just want them to know that you were paying attention, that you're not just thanking them to thank them, that the interview, that it did mean a lot to you to have an interview at the school and that you did have a good time talking to them, because that's what it is. And you do want to enjoy yourself at the interviews. If you got that far, it was because they liked your application. They were getting to know you as a person. So that's why being yourself, but also selling yourself in a short amount of time, is the way to do it. The whole experience in general is just, looking back, it definitely is so stressful and so time consuming, but looking back, it's fun. Like, this is, just remember that it's your end goal of wanting to be a dentist, and you're working towards your career and getting one step closer each time. So just enjoy it. And then I'm not in dental school yet, but I know that when I get there, it's going to be so much work and so hard. So enjoying the journey to getting there is nice. And it is super exciting. So that is pretty much all about me and my experience at UGA and getting into dental school in a short amount of time. So if there are any questions, I'd love to answer those. You can just message them to us. And I'll be on here for the next 10-15 minutes. So feel free to send any of them our way. Okay, so we do have a question that says, do all dental schools require interviews? How do you pay for them all if you have to travel? So interviews are a mandatory part of the dental school application process. Like I said, they see you on paper, and interviews, you want them to be a mandatory part because they get thousands of applications that all look the same on paper, all have that great GPA, good DAT score, involvement, shadowing experience. They want to get to know you as a person and get to know that you would make a great dentist. You want to be able to shine and be able to talk to them and be yourself during those interviews. So that's why they do them. And then paying to travel. So it can become expensive. And that is also another thing. One piece of advice that someone told me was, unless there's a school that's far away that you really, really love, don't apply to it unless you'd be willing to pay for the interview. So basically, if you feel like you don't want to pay for the interview, then traveling expenses might be a little bit much, or it might be too expensive. there are a lot of cheaper ways to travel to interviews too. So if you have more time, I know a lot of people did like buses and trains rather than flights, or drove, staying at like Airbnbs instead of hotels. Things like that help, and typically they are only for a night. So some people made trips out of them if they were towards the end of the week, stayed for the weekend, and it made the cost a little bit more worth it. But if it is only for a night, then you are only paying for a night of a hotel or something. Also, you can definitely like pick your interview. So if you apply to a school and you get an interview and you realize it's too far, or you already interviewed at 4 schools that were closer or that you paid for to travel, and by the time you got to your 6th one, you don't want to anymore, that's totally fine. You just don't have to go to the interview. My last interview invite was for a school all the way in Colorado, and I'm in Georgia. So at that point, I decided I didn't want to go to that school that bad, and I was already accepted into a few other schools. So I decided that I wouldn't go to that interview. It wouldn't be worth the cost. While we're waiting for some more questions, I'll talk a little bit about my gap year. So like I said, I wanted to wait until after my senior year to apply to dental school, which would mean I had a gap year. So it has been the best decision. Like, I am glad that the way that it worked out, like choosing to be pre-dental after freshman year and not really having enough time to shadow and stuff. At first I was like, this sucks that I'm not applying right after my junior year and going to start right after undergrad, but it has been so nice to experience working and living just as a young adult before going to dental school. It has been a break from UGA, especially before like I was a double major at UGA, so a lot of science classes, a lot of late night, all-nighters, and just having a break from studying before dental school, which is even harder than being a double major in college, was great. Like, I am, at this point, instead of dreading school or dreading studying, I'm excited to go back to school, and I'm so ready to learn and excited about all the classes and the homework and all of that. So it has been a great experience, and I know a lot of people choose to like live at home rather than living in an apartment like I do, and they're able to save so much money before dental school, which I know has helped them a ton. So we have a question from Stephanie. Did you take time off before you applied to dental school? If you didn't, have you heard of taking the opportunity and getting it back? Yeah, so like I said, I decided to apply right after my senior year, so I'm forced to take time off because the way the cycle goes is you apply in June to start the following summer, so you're basically off for a year. Which is the time in which you're doing interviews and all that. So, yeah, I loved it. I'm glad I did it. And everybody that I've talked to, like all of the admissions counselors, because when I was deciding if I was going to go ahead and apply after my junior year or wait till I would have all this stuff to add on my application, I did talk to a lot of schools about it. And they said that they don't view gap years or taking time off as bad at all, as long as you have reasoning as to why you're doing it. Like, you're not taking a gap year, taking time off to just party and have fun. If you're taking it to travel because you really needed a break after undergrad, you can explain that, and then that's fine. If you're taking it to make some money before dental school, that's fine. If you're taking it to, there's so many reasons. You just want to be able to justify why you took a gap year, not just that you were lazy to go back to school and wanted to do nothing. But everybody that I've talked to, actually, I think it helped me a lot, because the school that I'm actually going to, during my interview, he was talking about how much I added to my application my senior year, and he was talking about my experience now, like working as an assistant and working for a dental lab, and he was just saying that it's so great that I waited to have all of this to enhance my application to apply, because he was saying that so many people are applying right after their junior year when they don't have the time in undergrad to add all of this and to have these experiences, and they're getting denied and then having to go through the whole process again after their senior year. So it definitely is something to think about if you have your reasons and you think your application might be better. So that is all that I have, and we're actually running out of time, but I had a great time talking to you guys about my experience, and our DAT, OAT, PCAT page is always open for questions and messages about anything about the application process and anything about interviews and the DAT. We'd love to help you, and I actually can answer a lot of those questions for y'all from my experience. We do have some events coming up that I want to tell you guys about. We have a free DAT class on organic chemistry from Monday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Sorry, guys. And it is online. That's February 26th. And February 28th, we have a free DAT practice test. That's Wednesday. And it's 8 p.m. to midnight. And that is online as well. And the website to sign up for those events, if you guys are interested, is www.captest.com/DAT. Oh, there you go. /free/events. Like I said, let us know if you guys have any questions. And I had a great time talking to y'all tonight. Good night.